Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I'm joined by Connolly, and we will also be joined by Natasha Meikle, who will be joining us to talk about all manner of subjects involving Celtic. Lawrence, there's always loads to talk about. The main topic is still who is going to take over as manager. Just about everybody's thrown their hat in the ring. We're also going to be speaking about the matter of a Glasgow derby game this weekend, and the terminology obviously that's been used in different areas of the football world being owned and claimed and controlled by Celtic, which is a good move, but they have confirmed that as well. Lawrence, people going on about the use of the term Old Firm over the Glasgow derby, and if you don't use it then you're being petty. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it's factually correct, isn't it? There's no doubt. I mean, it's proven in a court of law. I think Charles Green's lawyer also said, it's a new Rangers football club. The old one died. So, you can call it Old Firm if you just want to describe a job between Celtic and any football club called Rangers, maybe. I don't know. It's kind of... It's definitely a new one. I'm not overly bothered whether people use it or not, but it certainly doesn't describe the original Old Firm combatants anymore, because one of them doesn't exist.
The big thing for me is the minute anyone says it on A Celtic State of Mind, and it has slipped through the net a few times, Lawrence, you have been guilty, so you've got a big black mark against your name. People do dive on it because I understand why people are so passionate about ensuring that history isn't rewritten. There is no revisionism, and that's not taken away from what's happened this season. In actual fact, I say as a Celtic supporter that the fact that a club has been able to climb through the leagues and win the league so quickly is very much to the detriment. If this was a club that had 130 odd years of goodwill, you would understand it, but Celtic have had quite a head start, and we've blown it. We've absolutely blown it. I had a very interesting discussion just last night, actually, Lawrence, all around the furore this season. And I was asked the question, do you think that you and the podcast overreacted? Absolutely not. I mean, I'm sitting here with the benefit now of hindsight, going back over the season, which I'm not going to do because it was painful enough first time round. But I don't think there was an overreaction. I think Celtic fans seen the signs. They seen what was happening very early on, and they called it out. And credit to those who called it out a lot sooner than I did. But before we move into that area of the conversation, Natasha is joining us. And there we go. Natasha, welcome to Celtic State of Mind.
Thanks, guys. Fashionably late, that's fine. Thank you. Before we actually move on, thank you very much to long-time contributor Mark Tyler, I think that's how we pronounce Mark's surname, who has actually put together and compiled an Axon playlist, which let's just call eclectic, I think. I was listening to it this morning, Natasha. It's pretty... So was I.
It's pretty random.
It is very random. I don't think I've ever seen some of those songs on the same playlist, but it is certainly broadening my musical horizons. So thank you for that, guys. And I'm sure I am introducing you to things you would never normally have listened to.
Well, the big thing for me is I didn't pick my 5 best party tracks. I've got to say, certainly mines are a wee bit kind of low tempo, but I've never had a compilation where we move from the Backstreet Boys to the Beta Band. But yeah, it's enjoyable all the same. Natasha, exactly. You've just joined us in the middle of a conversation all around this weekend's fixture, of course. That's what we're talking about. And the club have clarified the position on the Old Firm trademark. So that was good to get it clarified. And as had been suggested, it's all around you trademark that term, you control it. So no one can go and make money off it. No one can use it without the club's permission in that respect. So it's a good move. We control the fact that we don't see ourselves as part of this alliance.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've mentioned on here before, I'm a lawyer. I spent a very, very short period of time in intellectual property law. So my knowledge on that is not the same as some others might be. But it made sense. The minute I saw them do it, it was like, well, of course they would. Not only for, some of the historical material that we've got, but to protect the use of it going forward. So while we won't use it and while we won't refer to ourselves in something that doesn't exist any longer, then it makes sense to use and keep the trademark. And anyone using that as a suggestion that Celtic still want to be part of that alliance, I think is clutching at straws slightly there.
Yeah, I would say so. Now, obviously, it's the big talking point. Regardless of what's happened with the league, we are playing Rangers this weekend. And, looking ahead to that game, there's been a lot of discussion around what exactly is John Kennedy trying to do between taking the reins on an interim basis to the end of the season. Is it an ongoing job interview as such? Because, the way I look at it, Natasha, is Celtic should be making their minds up about certain players who have a question mark, quite a bold question mark over them. And I'm talking about players like the goalie that we spent £5 million on, Barkas, and also Ajeti, but another striker as well for me in Lee Griffiths. There's a huge question mark over whether or not Griffiths has another year at Celtic. I mean, how would you approach this weekend's game in respect of it's a dead rubber? Is there such a thing? And, we really want to assess a lot of these players who may or may not be here come next season. How would you approach the lineup?
For me, yeah, absolutely. For the rest of the season, I want to assess some of the players. I want to see some of the fringe players and I want to make a decision on them. Not this weekend. For me, this weekend, I want us to go with our strongest lineup and I want to see us do whatever it takes to stop this invincible league season. When Glasgow derbies come around, they're never dead rubbers. I want to see Celtic do everything they can to win that game. And that means playing our strongest lineup. Going forward, after this weekend and after this game, I do want to see more of Barkas. I want to see Griffiths get another shot. I want to see El Yunusi so that we can make a decision on whether we're going to spend money on him. I want to see him play more game time. Let's try some different formations up top let's try Ajeti and Klimala, let's try Ajeti and Griffiths, or Klimala and Griffiths. I want to see those sort of formations. But this weekend I want to see Edward, because I think Edward's the most likely of all of our strikers to score goals. The rest of the season going forward, absolutely, let's assess the full squad. This weekend, let's put out our strongest team and try and get the win.
This discussion will invariably lead us on to who's going to take over as well, Natasha. That's a massive part of assessing the squad. But Colin and I met up on Saturday there. We had a free weekend in terms of Celtic playing, and we decided to have a look at the squad and have a look at just how big the rebuild is as well. And I for one, I knew it was a big rebuild, but I was astonished at the amount of players that might actually be leaving the club. I think we counted up to 18 players that might be leaving, and that includes the loanees, of course, who are already in. Lawrence, I think most Celtic fans will echo the views of Natasha in relation to the way you approach the game. What's your thoughts this weekend? Can you see Celtic making many changes from the team that were disappointing against Dundee United?
I don't see too many changes, but I think a big problem is we're at this point of the season we don't know what our strongest 11 is, and that's probably why we're talking about we need to see these players to see if we can make a decision. Saying that, I wouldn't make too many changes, but it is a problem. We don't know what strongest 11 is. Who is our best keeper? Barkas, he's not in many games. Is he better than Bain? Would you throw him in here? Probably not, but we're at a situation, the league's gone. We're March the 16th, day before Paddy's Day, and we still don't know our best 11. But I can't see us making many changes on it, if any. But yeah, the season going forward, we need to be giving these guys a run out. And I think probably the new manager or director of football have already been approached. The negotiations are on a bit, and hopefully we're speaking with them in the background, and John Kennedy's speaking with them in the background, and getting some thoughts already about who we'd like to see and maybe some things we'd like to try before now and the end of the season.
This is a big thing for me, Lawrence, because you couldn't possibly come in once this season finishes, assess the squad, decide which loanees you want to return, which ones you want to retain, and then decide to yourself how many players do I need to bring in. The rebuilding job's too big between the end of the season and the European qualifiers. It's just impossible for anybody to do that. So you would hope, Natasha, that the club are doing all this in the background and we're liaising with a potential managerial dream team. Talking of which, though, Tony Haggerty did say quite some time ago that you aim at the very highest and you go for the very top of the tree, the man who's number one on your list, and you ask him the question. And over the last week or so, I've read various reports all around Ralph Rangnick, who, a lot of people like the sound of him. A lot of people like what he does to clubs in terms of the whole structure, from the first 11 on the park right down to youth development, the recruitment, the whole structure of the football department. And people kind of took it as read that he was gone, he was going to join Schalke. But the more you look into that, it's not as simple as that. He's still not with Schalke. And apparently the actual offer that was made to him was by a non-legitimate group of Schalke. There's real disharmony amongst the club at the moment. So he hasn't signed anything. He's not part of Schalke going forward. But what I would take from that, if I was a football club like Celtic, is I would think, well, there is an opportunity there to still go to the very top of the tree and ask the question. He's shown that he would, yes, I know the Bundesliga is a much bigger proposition, a much bigger league than the Scottish League. But in terms of ambition, Celtic's ambition, hopefully going forward, will be in Europe as well. Natasha, do you still think that you would ask the question of someone like Ralph Rangnick?
I'd be asking the question. Certainly, I want us to ask the question of everyone who's on our shortlist, and I have to assume they have a shortlist. I don't know how many names. For example, let's say they have a 10-man shortlist, and then below that a second string list. I want them to be at least going out and asking the question to all these people. And if people think people like Rangnick and Benitez shouldn't be on the list, what's the harm in asking the question? If they say no, then move to your backup option. The worry I have is that we're taking so long about it. People like Rangnick are looking other places. These managers who are at the top of our list, who we think, realistically, we're not going to get them. But that's because they have so many other options. They have other options to go to big leagues, big clubs. Celtic being a big club, but we're not in a big league. So these guys all have other options. And if we're stalling and if we're not asking the questions, they're going to get snapped up. I think we're going to have to come a little bit further down the tree than that. But I hope that these discussions are already underway, and I accept that it's not a quick process. But I'd like to see some progress being made, whether that's, a director of football being appointed first, and we hear the announcement on that with a manager to follow. For example, if we do announce that Harkin is going to be coming into this director of football role, something like that would then signpost that perhaps Maresca's coming in to work with them. So that could give some indication of where we're going. I'd like to see that progress being made. And you compare it with, I don't know if you've seen what Aberdeen have done this morning with the interview they've posted on their Twitter page, really just updating the fans on what they're doing. They're telling them that they're interviewing people, they have candidates, they've looked at all the applications they've got in, they've talked to all the people on their shortlist, and that it's a process that might take 2 weeks, it might take 3, it might take 4. But they're telling them how they're working through it, they're telling them the values they have in mind when they're approaching these individuals. And they're telling them, we are doing some work here behind the scenes. And I fully believe that Celtic will be. They could just communicate a bit better what they are doing and what the process is likely to be, how long it will take, when we expect to see some changes coming in, or at least just come out and confirm that it is John until the end of the season, which we all expect, but it was never actually confirmed to us, and that would have stopped a good amount of speculation.
No, you're right, and it's as simple as that. It really is that simple, Natasha. I was just speaking this morning about how everyone's adapted to this virtual life, and how's it going to get back to normal? Well, the new normal will not be as we were going about our business before. So you look at the music industry, you look at live tours and things that have been put off already for 18 months, potentially getting put off for another 6 months. We're at that stage where when we move into that 2 years down the line, we use our communications differently. And Aberdeen have done that to great effect. We've criticised Celtic on this podcast for the way they've been engaging, but then we've got to give them credit for what they've done over the last few weeks, and part of that was they invited a number of podcasts in on a conference, and they fed us their own message, and they allowed us to speak to John Kennedy and David Turnbull. So follow that up and continue with that engagement and talk to us. And I know that obviously figures at Celtic have been in discussions with the Scottish Government this week in relation to this weekend's game. Lawrence, I'm going to come to you. I know you're very politically minded when it comes to Celtic and Scotland as a whole. What's your thoughts on this intervention, if you like, that we've seen developing over the last few days?
I think the government had to intervene. Police are now showing some proactive policing. I believe they've been using intelligence-led policing, and they've been visiting people in their homes and at their workplaces to tell them not to turn up at the ground, people that are on their intelligence lists. Or they're visiting the right people, but it shows the police do know how to preempt a situation and control it. Just can I ask questions about why they didn't do it, the other weekend on the Saturday and Sunday? Have they all of a sudden only just learnt these new skills? I don't know. Government's got to be involved with some kind of intervention, because after what was allowed to happen and encouraged to happen, I think a lot of people would attain that as a green light to do what they want at this game. Well, look what happened the last 2 times we've done it. The police gave us escorts, so why wouldn't we go? Because it's allowed. So I think they need to get the message out, that it's not. It's just Celtic's been kind of dragged into it as part of the story, when I don't really think that's where the focus should be on us. It should have been on the other team and how they approached it. The SFA still haven't spoken about car sharing, about the numerous breaches that we're seeing live in camera. St Mirren and Kilmarnock must be raging, because when it was car sharing for them, it was you're losing 3 points. I understand they won that back in an appeal, but it was came down on pretty quickly, and it doesn't seem to be as swiftly for the latest breaches.
See, when you talk about the intelligence-led policing, we spoke about that last week, didn't we? Where they were basically asking us a question, how do we police this? And it was pretty obvious to anyone that intelligence-led policing was the way to take it forward. Now, that actually feeds in, Natasha, to a conversation we had with Celtic Shared. And you remember some of the criticisms around that were that the 2 guests we had as part of that podcast didn't reveal their identities. And the reason they didn't reveal their identities were because they were part of the Green Brigade. And we spoke about that after the event, and it was all around the minute you say, I'm Paul John Dykes and I'm part of the Green Brigade, then you are on the police's radar. And you're the type of person who they will find out where you live, they will knock on your door, and they might speak to you in front of your kids and your wife and your family, and actually make the whole process very uncomfortable. Now, is that effective use of intelligence-led policing, or is that harassment? Because there's a very thin line in relation to that. Now, when it comes to how the police manage to gather that intelligence, a lot of that is open source intelligence, social media, for example, and they will try and infiltrate certain accounts to try and find out more information. But also they have snitches. People might not want to believe that, but they do have snitches who are feeding them information about people who are main players within any risk group, within any football fan base, and they will be feeding information constantly to the police. And a lot of people don't like the thought of that, but it does happen. So intelligence-led would definitely be the way forward. But again, going back to the point Lawrence made, where was that intelligence-led policing leading up to the point where everybody realised it was going to happen, the celebrations, in inverted commas, turning nasty, and damage being inflicted on street furniture, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. It is frustrating to see this all taking place after the event. The scenes we saw were entirely predictable, and because they were predictable, it means they were preventable. It's not up to us or the media or anyone to tell the police what they should have done. It's up to them to have known what was required for that situation. We see We've seen recently at various gatherings that they're more than capable of dispersing large crowds, just apparently not large crowds of football fans, or the correct Rangers fans. It wasn't football fans, it wasn't Celtic fans, Aberdeen fans, Hibs fans, it was Rangers fans, and they weren't dispersed. In fact, by the police not doing that on the Saturday and by the media glorifying it and reporting on it, it encouraged it on the Sunday. So I do think it's a bit rich for them now to take this action ahead of this weekend's game. And equally, the club that were involved last weekend or the weekend before have to look at their own actions as well. It's all well and good coming out now with statements from their captain, from their manager, from the club saying don't gather, don't attend. If they'd done that a couple of weekends ago, we really could have seen those scenes being prevented. So it is too late. But in saying that, I would certainly have to encourage any Celtic fan who was considering attending Celtic Park at the weekend not to do it. We don't want to be dragged down to that level. We don't want our name associated with that. Those scenes were a Rangers issue. Let's keep it that way, and let's not have us go down to that level by turning up. Everyone can enjoy it from their own homes, and we'll get back to the ground when we can. But for me, it's just, again, to reiterate the message from the club that we should be watching this one at home.
No, definitely. I think John Kennedy came out, didn't he, on Celtic TV to send that message as well. Natasha, using the wonders of modern technology. Now, one of the big questions today is around Roy Keane. We've got to mention him. I know it's going to be part of a wider discussion tomorrow with Colin Watt on Paddy's Day. But Roy Keane, for me, I tweeted straight away, not for me, Natasha, absolutely not for me. And I based that, before I even got onto the intricacies of his character, his approach, the way that he is a divisive figure, it has been said, in changing rooms and dressing rooms, both as a player and as a manager. I just based it simply on his managerial record. I had a look at his record, and I just don't think that it's good enough for him to be considered as a Celtic manager. And I stated that, and I think the majority of Celtic fans agreed with that. Lawrence, I'll come to you first. What's your thoughts on Roy Keane? I'm going to go to some of these comments as well. Some brilliant comments coming in on the social media channels. What's your thoughts, Lawrence?
I think, it definitely demands high standards of professionalism and diet and all that. I think it'd bring that. But for me, it's no. And even if you go back to how he reacted in the World Cup to Mick McCarthy, and just that blown up in public. His managerial record, I think you're right, it's not good enough. And I've also got the feeling that, once he's not back Desmond once, I don't think Dermot will give him a second opportunity. I think he's had his chance when his stock was a bit higher. He said no. His managerial record's not great. So, yeah, for me, I don't think he's the right guy. But, he would certainly come in as the figurehead manager. I think for us, it's more about the whole team that comes in as well. But for me, I know, but it's going to rest with Desmond. And I think he'll say no purely based on the fact he knocked him back the floor. I don't even think he'll go as far as managerial and what else he would bring. I think he'll go, look, you had a chance and you said no, and that's it.
You don't get a second chance. You've mentioned Mick McCarthy there. Natasha, 3-4 months ago, if we were shouting for Mick McCarthy to come in at Celtic, we would have been shot down in flames. Look at the job that he's done at Cardiff City. Mick McCarthy and Roy Keane famously fell out over the facilities that the Republic of Ireland were dealing with in a major tournament finals. He does have high standards, of course, but I think that what's happened over the last season is that we've realised that the approach of Neil Lennon certainly didn't work with the current group of players that we have at our disposal. Do you think Roy Keane could come in and get a tune out of that team?
You've touched on it there, and I only echo what you guys have both said about his managerial record, but taking that to one side, looking at his style of management. Now, it's very clear he's an old school, he would have an old school type approach. I think it'd be very similar to Lennon's. And we've just seen this season that Lennon's style doesn't work with the squad we have in place. And we've touched on it before in the show, this idea of a modern footballer, and modern footballers aren't responding to old school tactics. And for me, Roy Keane would bring in this old style that we're trying to move away from. It didn't work for Lennon, and I don't see how Keane would therefore be able to, get a tune, as you said, out of, a player like Edward or Cham or El Yunusi or Gillian or Ayer or Christie. We're moving into these modern players who apparently don't like being shouted at on the side of a pitch, and the old school hairdryer treatment does not work on these type of new players. And I think that would be an absolute clash of styles with what we've got with Roy Keane and the players in the squad we have. Obviously, a lot of the squad that we have are these modern players, but a lot of them are going to be leaving. And it depends on the group of players you have coming through. But I think we are moving towards seeing players more like that, old school management going a bit more out of the window. And it's these progressive, younger European managers that are getting more out of players like that ilk that we mentioned. So for me, maybe Roy Keane would have been the man for the job back in 2014 when he turned it down. The crop of players we had at that time probably wouldn't be described as this new modern footballer. And maybe he regrets not taking it at the time. But I think he could have done a great job then. I don't think he'd do a good job now.
No, I tend to agree with that. And I think back to when he was announced as a player and the scenes outside Celtic Park. We've seen similar kind of scenes when Robbie Keane came in quite late at night, and he was announced on, I think it was transfer deadline night, Robbie Keane was announced. And this congregation of fans outside Celtic Park. And then, of course, famously, Brendan Rodgers attracted about 13,000 fans to the stadium. At the moment, if they were to come out with this box office appointment, and I'm not saying Roy Keane is that box office appointment, they would have a job on their hands, Lawrence, trying to make fans not go to the stadium. I don't think that's a consideration at this point, I've got to say. But certainly that would be the feel-good factor, gets people in their droves going to the stadium. But I don't think Roy Keane's got that attraction now to Celtic fans as he did as a player, or as Natasha said, as he may have done back when he was asked first time round.
I think this is whether it's Roy Keane, I think he's still a bit box office, but I think we could get better. But hopefully this is just news management, and hopefully Celtic are going to manage it as when they do the announcements through Pass to Paradise, and they tell everybody, listen, sign in, we've got something to tell you, something big, and announce it to the fans one-to-one, and really get a bit more professional about it. I think, the information's pretty tight at Celtic Park at the moment. I think the decisions have been made, and I think it's just news management. But I hope the announcement isn't to the press. I hope they cut the press out and just do it directly to the fans initially, and try and get some goodwill and some extra value back to the fans. And I think whoever comes in is going to be box office. But, yeah.
I'll come back to you on that, Lawrence, because I'm going to ask you where we are with this at this moment in time. First of all, Patrick Murphy, you're watching on YouTube, Patrick. Thanks for joining us. We are building the channel, and it's fan media, it's fan motivated media. Everybody who is on a Celtic State of Mind is a Celtic supporter, and we're putting our views across. So please subscribe on YouTube if you're watching on there. Follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Patrick reckons no, he shouldn't even be in the conversation. Very little success as a manager and volatile reputation. It stinks of a lazy approach if Keane is in the frame, but I think it's paper talk and clickbait. Celtic Rambler goes on to say if they appoint Roy Keane, there's serious problems going on at Celtic, and OB boy, no to Keane, Celtic have to think bigger. And there's also other people coming in to echo that view. Kaplan Mark, not the best choice, but would take him over a project under 23 coach. So that brings into the question the Fergal Harkin stroke Enzo Maresca approach, and that's one that we have spoken about, Natasha, on the show. Maybe a wee bit more difficult to sell to the supporters, but a longer term view if we were to go down that route.
Yeah, to be honest, I have to disagree on that one. I think that I would take Maresca over Keane any day of the week. If we're looking at where we're going as a club over the next 2, 3, 5 years, then I think that something like a Harkin-Maresca partnership is where we have to look at. I fully accept that he has not been tested at a fuller management level, that the under-23 league isn't the same. You have to. Gerrard was an under-23 manager, and while it's taken him time to get up to speed, it's worked now. The concern I see there is Celtic fans looking at that and say, well, if Gerrard was an under-23 manager, he needed years of experience to get him to where he is now. He failed for years before achieving something this season. We don't have that time. We need the pendulum to start swinging back instantly. So appointing an under-23 manager does come with that risk. For me, from the signs that we've seen, if we bring in someone like Harkin to oversee him, and then let him have, free reign of the coaching and the training, I think that sort of partnership could work, and it's probably more along the lines of where we want to see our club going. I mean, that Manchester City under-23 team are flying. You just have to look at that result the other day. That's 7-1 to put them 5 points clear at the top, I think it is. He's getting, great results out of a young team. Some of them are still only teenagers in that league. And if we want to start focusing more on developing our own players, getting the best out of the players we have, getting the best out of the youth system, using that more as, sort of financial markets and Brexit markets take effect, then he has to be a great choice for that role. So for me, it might not be a box office name, but in terms of what we could achieve under that, I think Harkin and Maresca would be a great appointment.
You're talking there about some other managers who have taken that route as well, Natasha. You mentioned Stevie Gerrard, who obviously has come to fruition for him now. But, Brendan Rodgers, I'm not saying he was Chelsea's under-23 coach, but he was the head of the youth at Chelsea, and he's learning his Spurs there before he moves on to be a manager in his own right. It is a route and it is a path in modern football that managers do take. And I think one of the biggest things for me looking at Enzo Maresca is he will have an intimate knowledge of that market down south. I mean, he has a team that's playing every other team in that division who will be filled with talented players who will never break through to their parent club, be that Spurs, Arsenal, Man United, etc. And of course the Man City players that we've already seen over the last few years who have come from the under-23s, and I think Kevin and Russell touched on this yesterday, and they've come into Celtic and they've been standouts. I mean, Frimpong being the latest example of a player who was playing for that very team not that long ago. Now he's an £11.5 million signing from Celtic to Bayer Leverkusen. So I think that's key, because obviously the change in markets that you've mentioned, you need to have a knowledge of the British market, because that is the type of player that we're going to be buying moving into the new season. Lawrence, what's your thoughts on that? Maybe doesn't have the box office appeal, but if we have a plan, it sounds as though that would fit the plan much better.
Yeah, I think whoever we bring in, it needs to be bringing a team in. And I think box office is really about how we manage the news and how we pitch it, how we communicate about what we're going to do. If we just go, listen, it's fair going under 23 coach for Man City and that's the announcement, it doesn't sound very good. But, there's a way to build this up and, a plan to put in place. And if we communicate that effectively, I think it becomes box office. If we say, look, this is why this guy, here's his record, this is what we're planning to achieve in the next 5 years with him, all of a sudden it's a bigger announcement. He looks to be doing well with under-23s. You touched on it, Rodgers, was at Chelsea, I think Reading as well. And yeah, it's a route. You've got Bale across the city who will learn at a number of clubs as a coach. So definitely a route. Does it fit what we're doing? We've certainly had a lot of dealings with Man City recently, haven't we? That seem to have worked. And we've got to remember Frimpong was a guy that was surplus to their requirements that we've just got, what is it, 10 million quid for?
Yeah.
So, if that's a standard that he's saying's not good enough, you're wondering what guy, the standard that is good enough to meet his team. So, they're letting him go. So, I think the guy definitely knows a player. If you look at his results, the team is playing well. Some people might say, Man City have got more money to spend down there in England. Well, we've got the most money to spend in Scotland, so it's kind of moving from the same market conditions, if you like. We do spend in other clubs. We are in Scotland with the biggest budget.
Now, Robbie Smith comes in and asks the question, if Roy, for example, going back to Roy Keane, came in, would he bring his own team or would he keep Kennedy and Strachan? And I find that an interesting point, because Brendan Rodgers has been bigging up John Kennedy and saying that certainly if he doesn't get the manager's role, he should remain at the club. John Collins thinks it's too early for John Kennedy to be the manager. And we've had the likes of John McGinn and John Hartson bigging up Stevie Clark for the manager's position. Other names that are still in the frame are such as Eddie Howe, Frank Lampard, and of course Chris Wilder was linked last week after he departed Sheffield United. I'm going to ask you straight up, Natasha, who is number one on your list at the moment? Is it Harkin and Maresca, or is there someone else you fancy?
Yeah, if I'm going with what I think we can, someone I think we can actually get on the list that I've got in front of me, yeah, I think it is. I think I'm more coming down to the idea that Maresca and Harkin is the right double act for me. The talk of Wilder, I won't entertain. I don't think he should be even considered for the job. The other names on the list I think are probably slightly unachievable. If we're going to talk about Benitez, yeah, I'd love that. I'd love Pep as well. I don't think it's going to happen. So if I'm looking at that list there, I'm going to say no to I'm not going to say yes to Clark. I don't want it to be Kennedy. So yeah, Maresca and Harkin for me is coming out top on the list. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I like the idea of it simply because if you take everything into consideration, where we are, where we're going, the financial element of it, the issues that we may have with what was our signing policy, buying young players from overseas, nurturing them, selling them on for a profit, we might have to revisit that. So I totally understand. But I'm like yourself, if we were to announce someone like Ranić and Benitez and Martinez and all of these massive named managers, then of course it would excite me as much as it would excite the next fan. But my big fear there is that there are managerial vacancies coming up down south. There's going to be far more between now and the end of the season. And I think Eddie Howe and Chris Wilder and Lampard will be on the top of numerous lists at this moment in time. I'm going to come back to you because I know that last week, Natasha, this week there was a meeting via Zoom, which unfortunately my email ended up in the spam folder, and I didn't get to the meeting. But it was an update. It was a Zoom meeting with Celtic Shared, wasn't it? So what's the update that you got from that meeting?
Yeah, so no, it was good to have a kick-off meeting and explain to the people on it a bit more about who Celtic Shared are and what their goals are, short-term, long-term, medium-term. And it was an opportunity for representatives from some of, the big associations, supporters clubs, fan media to all come together and talk about what we can do as one group under one umbrella to try and, have a bigger voice at the club. Because I think that's one thing that we all recognise is needed is a bit more representation. Now, we're not asking the club to come and consult us as to who the next manager should be. Nobody's talking about having that level of influence over the Celtic board. What we are talking about, though, is having a bit more collaboration. Listen to us, listen to our views, and you're going to create better harmony with the support. And that can touch on a range of issues. Obviously the big decisions are for the board, but let's take our views into account on some of the other ones which are going to really directly affect us. Let's talk about the added value issue. Why would the club sit amongst whoever's making these decisions and decide what is added value for the supporters when they've got fan groups available to discuss that with them and discuss their views? And now they don't have to take them on board, they don't have to implement the views of the fans, but why aren't they listening to them and why aren't they trying to have that sort of collaborative approach to some of the decision making that goes on? So yeah, the kick-off meeting was great and really discussed how that we can use Celtic Shared as a vehicle to try and get some of these actions into place. And the first step is going to be creating, a bit of a working group of representatives. Now, people have concern that it's too linked to the Green Brigade, and we've said it 100 times that it's not. The Green Brigade aren't running this. The analogy they like to use is that they put the keys into the ignition of the car and someone else will be driving it. So the next steps for Celtic Shared now are to create a bit of a working group to drive this forward and try and create some change. And there'll be plenty more Zoom meetings going forward. So I'd encourage everyone who's interested to follow the Celtic Shared page on Twitter. And if you haven't been involved so far, drop the guys an email and they'll get you onto the mailing list. And you'll be able to join some of the future Zoom calls.
Brilliant. And again, brilliant engagement, Natasha. It's as simple as that, isn't it?
Right.
Some excellent comments coming in. Maravchik, welcome back to the show. You're commenting on YouTube. Roy can't manage players of inferior ability to himself. I remember hearing a story about Glenn Hoddle, who obviously done particularly well as a manager, and he could not get it. He couldn't get his head around players who couldn't do what he could do. So instead of continually trying to explain it, he would just do it. But then the players had this reaction of the gaffer thinking he's a better footballer than us, even though he's 10, 15 years older. So I understand that. And that's why every great player isn't a great manager, because, you know, they can't get their methods through to the players that they're dealing with as well, a lot of the time. Ewan Boy Martin, Keane would be a disaster and set us even further back. And interestingly enough, we've mentioned Mick McCarthy. He would be a choice before Keane as well. Zinco is a very definitive list here. Benitez, Martinez, Howe and Hughes in that order. It's interesting to see how Mark Hughes has appeared a fair bit on the media in relation to his availability. Obviously, we spoke to Mark a few weeks ago, and, you know, he is a candidate, and he did appear on the odds list. I think, you know, you might say, well, Neil Lennon appeared on Aberdeen's odds list, so you don't know what to make of that. But without doubt, he will get a job in management, and it wouldn't surprise me if he was in a job by the end of the season, and it'll probably be down at the top tier in England as well. So, you know, a lot of people scoffed at the idea of Mark Hughes. I still think he is a genuine candidate for our job. But what I would have done is I would have had him in just now assessing the squad. Even on an interim basis till the end of the season, and then we can reevaluate it from there. One of the biggest concerns for me, and we did speak about it on Saturday, Colin and I, is just the raft of players going to be leaving Celtic Park this pre-season. So I've written down a potential lineup against Rangers this weekend. Let me know if any of these players have been called off by injury and I'm not aware of it. I reckon we're going to line up Scott Bain in goals with Kenny, Laxalt, Ayer Welsh, Brown, McGregor, Christian Turnbull, Edouard and El Yunusi. I think that is a potential lineup for the weekend's game. But if we were to go back to the conversation that Colin and I had at the weekend, Kenny and Laxalt are definitely gone. They're going to be returning from their loan. Ayer is potentially going to be bought for big money, hopefully. If it is going to be a transfer, it's for the right price. Scott Brown, there's question marks around whether or not he's going to play a part next season. And then you've got Christie, who may be leaving, Edouard, who almost certainly is leaving, and Moy, who may be going back from his loan deal. So that leaves from the 11 Scott Bain, Stephen Welsh, Callum McGregor and Davy Turnbull. That is astonishing. That's two-thirds of it. That's two-thirds of a side gone.
I think Bain will be off. I think we're keeping. I don't think it will be second choice. So
we discussed that as well, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think Conor Hazard's your normal, second choice. You've got Barkas. I think we're going to. If Barkas isn't going to work for the new guy, I think we'll sign a new keeper. And I think Bain will then look at it and go, right, there's Barkas and Conor Hazard. I'm off. I need to be playing first choice somewhere.
Mm-hmm. It really is. When you write it down and you look at it, even Bain, I did have Bain circled on Saturday's agenda as well, Lawrence, because I agree with you, he's at that age now. But he's almost 30, and I know goalkeepers can play longer, but he's definitely not going to go into next season as number one. I mean, Conor Hazard signed a deal, so he's going to be a backup, maybe number 3. We've got Barkas there. The Barkas situation would be, do you cut your losses and get £2 or £3 million back for him by selling him back to a Greek club? And then the new manager wants to bring in a new goalie. So Bain, question mark over him as well. And it just leaves us with Welsh, McGregor and Turnbull. Natasha, what's your thoughts on that?
It's frightening, isn't it? It's frightening how much of a rebuild this is actually going to be, and we've talked about it being a big rebuild, but only when you say it like that and only when you write it down, I think, do you really appreciate the magnitude of the task that is ahead. The issue is, who's it ahead for? Who is coming in to take on that task? Because if you look at that number of players going out the door, that's the number of players we need in the door at a minimum. So the turnover is going to be huge, and like you said, we're less than 100 days from the start of the Champions League qualifiers, and this task hasn't even started yet. Now, it's going to be a mammoth effort to get that number of players out and that number of players in and form them into a cohesive team ready to start a Champions League qualifier. And we're so guilty of going into these qualifiers underprepared, and I can't see this season being any different from from the time we've got left and the tasks we've got ahead. Like you've touched on, Paul, I have absolutely no idea why we didn't have someone in January if they were available, and start the task then. The longer we have to do this, the better. And all we're doing now is sort of, shortening and running out of time. The only explanation for me can be that we are waiting for someone who's only going to be available in the summer. But if they've decided to go with someone who's asked to wait until the summer, then they're taking a huge risk on the way we're going to be prepared for next season. So the person they bring in is going to really have to have been worth waiting for. So yeah, I'm definitely concerned about the size of the task ahead and the period of time we've got to do it in, because we really need to hit the ground running next season if we're to start the pendulum swinging back this way.
Yeah, you're right. And, when I'm looking at that, Lawrence, I made a point during the week that this would be one of the reasons why I would actually keep Scott Brown. There's a continuity aspect to this, that if that amount of players leave, and there's more, and you'd expect Cham to leave permanently, you would expect players maybe like Rogic to be on his way. There's question marks around Klimala, Bayo, Jack Hendry, other guys who are out on loan that will be sold on a permanent basis. So when you're looking at that side, I made the point that guys like Scott Brown, the senior pros, those who have the knowledge of Celtic, who have been there for a number of years, I would put James Forrest into that category, Callum McGregor's in that category, and potentially Lee Griffiths, but there's a question mark even around Lee Griffiths and his future at the club. I think that would be the main reason why I would keep Scott Brown at Celtic, because we need to stabilise, and even if he's not playing every week, you need to have that familiarity with the nucleus of a team that know the club and know the expectations of the fans as well. Lawrence, what's your thoughts on the upheaval and whether or not it's a good enough reason to keep Brown for at least another season?
I think even without the upheaval, I'd keep Brown around about the club. He's been so successful at the club, so upheaval regardless, I would keep Brown, and I think it's just another reason to keep him. We've got a lot of players going. It's probably reflective of the fact that the manager wasn't allowed to let players to leave who wanted to leave last summer. So we'll probably get kind of twice a normal turnover. It could be a good thing. I think with COVID and the financial effects in football clubs, I think there's going to be a lot of bargains to be had out there. I think the manager's been appointed. Celtic, or we've decided to, and he's having a look. Celtic are signing players at the moment. Mm-hmm. He's giving the green lights for signing players. Surely not Peter. He's leaving. Surely he's not still signing players. So I think there's a lot going on in the background. I remember when Strachan was appointed, it was months before that was announced. Strachan, it eventually came out. He's talked about it. He had to keep it secret for months. He was appointed. Mm-hmm. He was looking at videos. He was doing the work in the background. And I think we're in a similar situation at the moment. Huge turnover. But then again, a lot of the players you wouldn't want to keep. I think Griffiths will probably stay, because who's going to buy him with his recent track record and the wages he's on? So I can't see Lee getting a club who's going to pay him similar wages, and I can't see somebody want to stump up for someone that it's come March, he's not fit. Now, whether that's to do with his issues he's had in the past or whatever, they're still going to look at it and go, when was the last time he was fit for a season, or 3 or 4 months in a row? So I think Griffiths will be about. There'll be an option. But yeah, big turnover, which hopefully is exciting for us. We see some good quality coming in. We've already signed one player, but I think it's an opportunity to build something for the new manager.
Well, you mentioned Griffiths, so I'll run with that one as well, because there's a big question mark for me over Lee Griffiths. I think that on a Celtic State of Mind, we continually spoke about him in positive terms. I think we took into account all the issues that he's had away from football, off the park, and I think most people will agree that obviously some of these things were out with his control, but there were other things he could and should have done better. The fact that we're now in the middle of March and Lee Griffiths may or may not be match fit for a game is just astonishing, and there needs to be some ownership and accountability on Lee Griffiths' shoulders in relation to that. He's now 30. If you were to look at the last 3 seasons, he's made 19 appearances this season, and this includes substitute appearances, 32 last season and 20 the season before. So we continually go on about the season where he scored 40 goals. That was 5 years ago now, and I think that 20 appearances, 32, 19 on average off the top of my head, what you're looking looking at 20-odd, 24, 25 appearances a season. At the age of 30, any incoming manager is going to look at that and think, that's not good enough. I can't rely on that player. If there's no real connection between the manager coming in and Lee Griffiths, I can see him being shown the door. On the flip side, I've just said that I think it's important that we have the continuity of players like him and Brown, McGregor and Forrest. Natasha, does he get one final chance? Has he had quite a few final chances already?
For me, I think he's had enough final chances, and I think a new manager coming in is likely to show him the door, to be honest. We've had a lot of sympathy in the past for Lee Griffiths on here and continue to do so, but he has cost us this season. He didn't turn up for training, fit to do his job, and that's on him. And he's not been fit for the entire season. His wage could have been to someone else who was going to give 110% rather than to someone who was going to give 60%. If we had a fully fit, firing on all cylinders Lee Griffiths this season, partnerships up front with Edward that worked so effectively last season, I'd go as far as to say, we could have won games that we didn't. So he cost us. He's cost us points. And for me, that's very frustrating. He has had enough chances, and I don't think a new manager is likely to retain him on the basis of that. And again, touching on the point of wanting continuity and wanting leaders around the club, I'm not sure I'd put Griffiths into that bracket. Absolutely, I would, Brown and McGregor and Forrest, but I'm not sure Griffiths is exactly the role model I want the younger players coming through to try and emulate. The other three, absolutely, yes, leaders, keep them around and focus on them. And I think one thing we have perhaps lost this season is we did lose some of the leaders in the team. Whether footballing wise that it was time for them to go is perhaps true, but when you lose players like Gordon and Lustig and Hayes, some of the leaders in the dressing room, it did seem to fall apart in that department a bit. So absolutely agree with keeping Scott Brown around for his qualities in that area, similarly to McGregor and Forrest for that bit of continuity. But for me, Griffiths doesn't fit into that bracket, and I'd probably look to move him on.
If we're removing Griffiths from my list of four that came to my mind, Natasha, do you think that someone like Nir Beaton then, who already seems to have one foot out the door, is that type of player who's got the international experience at Celtic? Yes, he's never a first pick, but he's adaptable enough to play midfield or in defence. Is he the type of person that you can understand why a new manager would keep him for the very same reason of this continuity that we're discussing?
Yeah, I would keep Beaton if I'm honest. He is that sort of utility player that can fit in the midfield, he can fit in at centre half, and he gets the club and he's been around it for a long time, and he's always shown 100% commitment. I would keep Beaton for next season in the same way that I would probably have kept Hayes for this season. Someone who knew the club, someone who had leadership qualities, left back, left midfield, wherever you'd ask of him. Now, he wasn't the best footballer, and I don't think Beaton's the best footballer in the squad, but the other qualities they have, I think, are important, and I think we've lost that a bit this season.
Yeah, you just look at Beaton, I think, 8 seasons he's been at the club. So that's the continuity that we're talking about. He's seen the successes, he knows the demands. I don't think he's ever going to be the first pick, but, in saying that, you look at some of the seasons that he's had, and he's made, a number of times 30, 40 appearances, not so often in the last 3 seasons, to be fair, but he's that type of player. He's only 29. You talk about Lee Griffiths, he's 30. Nir Beaton, 29. Will he stay? There's certainly going to be up to, I counted 18 players who may be on their way out of Celtic Park, which is astonishing. You made a good point there about players being role models for younger players coming in, and we've been very critical of Celtic over a number of months in relation to the fact that we don't seem to be able to produce a striker that can score goals. It's been many, many years since we did that, but we shell out millions on players like Klimala, £3.5 million coming in from Poland. Again, how long is he going to get before we make a final assessment on him? Bayo comes in for a couple of £1,000,000. Yeah, he's scoring a few goals in the French second tier, but is he good enough for Celtic? My assessment would be absolutely not. Why can't we produce our own? And the big example I would use is Stephen Welsh. So at the beginning of the season, we needed this centre half, and this was at a time when Julian and I were both fit and both playing, and we all wanted another centre half to steady the back line. We brought in Duffy on big wages, big loan fee. It's cost the club millions of pounds to bring him in, yet I can't find a Celtic fan who would pick Duffy over Welsh for the game this weekend. Doesn't that show, Lawrence, that maybe we should have a wee bit more faith in the youth? Because Welsh has come in, and I know that Colin maybe doesn't rate him as highly as I do, but for me, alongside Dyer, he is our second centre half at the moment.
Yeah, but the boys need a chance, and I think without reserve football, what we've talked about loads of times, they don't really get the chance, and it's when we should be bleeding them, how we should be bleeding them. Well, hopefully the new manager's better, going to be a bit better at it for us. Duffy's definitely been the wrong mistake, looked good on paper, but yeah, we've got to give people a pathway to the first team, and if they don't see it, they'll go elsewhere. But we've seen a number of players leave to go to Bayern. There's Davy Hayes' grandson, is talking me going to Italy. But we need a manager that's going to convince people that the pathway is there, and we do need to have faith. But I think Welsh, it was kind of sink or swim with him. We were down to nothing. There was no other option. It wasn't a masterstroke or anything, and it wasn't a show of faith. It was like, right, we don't have anyone else to play, let's play him. And it seems to have worked out to a degree. And it may, we carry a big squad, so that's not really going to be a route that's open to a lot of people, the sink or swim route. But we need something that's a bit more planned.
Natasha, I think we do. Yeah.
The only issue I have with giving some more of the youth players a chance, and we say, we have to, we kind of did in January. Now, I was listening to Marvin Bartley speaking the other night when following, some of the changes that had been made, and he was touching on the Celtic team that played against Livingston, made up of the youth players, and he actually expressed a bit of surprise at how poor the quality was. He thought Celtic would have this excellent youth department whose players were ready to step into first team football, and unfortunately I just don't think they are at the moment, and too many of them haven't been. Absolutely, Welsh has done a great job since he came in, but the others we tried or had to bring in January following the Dubai issue, if you look at Henderson, if you look at Oko Flex, they weren't yet at the standard ready to step into the first team. So what we need is a manager, a coaching setup who are capable of offering, like Lawrence has said, that pathway of producing better players from our own youth department who can come into the first team, because the field of youth players we put out in January, far too many of them weren't at that level yet. So we do need to do a bit better in that department. And touching back on it, maybe someone like Maresca, who knows youth football and knows how important a pathway from under 23s to first team is, could come in and help with that.
I think it's one of these things, and we're probably all guilty of it, Natasha. Whilst you're winning league after league and there's invincible seasons and trebles, how many of us are saying, but I wish we had a left winger who came through the youth development rather than Sinclair, or Dembele. I wish we had reared. You don't look at it because you're enjoying the moment and you become intoxicated with the success. And I think football fans are guilty of that. And it's maybe only now where it's all kind of fallen to bits that we're now looking at a more long-term view. Interestingly enough, yesterday I was speaking to someone who's been involved with Motherwell and Hibs, former player who'd been involved with the youth set-up at Motherwell and Hibs, and what he says is they know at the age of 12 and 13 how difficult it is to get boys in, because they all want to sign for Celtic and Rangers, but the boys they get in by the time they're 17 or 18 have got far more experience and are now at that age wanted by Celtic and Rangers, and the players, their contemporaries at 12 and 13, are lost to the game. So he always advises young kids to go to a club like Motherwell or Hibs, where the chances of first team opportunities are far higher, because if you want to play for Celtic or Rangers, you've probably got a better chance doing it that way, going to Motherwell or Hibs or some of the other teams. That was the two examples he used because he was involved in the youth setup, and he reeled off a number of names of players that he had coached as young kids who had gone on to play for Celtic, and a few obviously who had gone to Rangers as well. So it is a concern, and I think that that approach, going to the next comment coming through from YouTube, winning an under-23 league with Man City, not a huge achievement. They will attract the best youth players possibly in Europe. Absolutely, I understand that point, but I think that when Celtic are looking to the full situation that they're going into next season, this desirable of having 2 or 3 young players coming through, Natasha, becomes a necessity, because we won't be able to bring in as many players as we did in the past. And I think that It's terrible to look at that Celtic team I've read out and said, well, why is John Joe Kenny playing at right back? Why is Diego Laxalt playing at left back? That's because we don't have a 17 or an 18-year-old right back or left back who's good enough. Yeah. So we've had to go out and get these guys in on loan. And both of those players have come in during the season. It's not as though we thought, right, we're going to bring them in at the beginning of the season and they'll either play second fiddle to Frimpong and Taylor or vice versa. It's because we needed to strengthen the squad. We don't have the youth development. Interesting that those comments were made about the Celtic youth, because we have always had a tradition of producing young players. Do you think that because of the situation we're in, Lawrence, that some of these traditional values, maybe not by choice, will return to Celtic next season, but it will of course take a number of seasons before we see the fruits of that labour?
Yeah, I think any youth policy is got to be judged over 5 or 10 years. I don't think next season, even if we implement it, would be to judge whether it's been a success or not. But I kind of read an article and it's made me think we've really got to concentrate on the first team and the reserve team, and it's maybe how much money are we putting into a complete youth setup, and would we be better buying players that are from elsewhere, like from Motherwell or Hibs, that are good enough, that have got the potential to step up, become players in the under 23 or reserves or whatever you want to call it, but they're first team ready. And that's where you spend the money that you've been investing in youth, because that must cost us a fortune to run every year.
What is it, £2.5 million? Is it £2.5 million a year?
Yeah, I think so.
To run it. So, but then the question would be, we're no longer at a stage where we can get a player from Motherwell for 300 grand, as we maybe did in the past with the likes of Stephen Pearson, for example. Motherwell want £3 million for a player at that level now.
What much was that boy we just picked up from England? What we're going to play in compensation for him?
It'll cost about 300 grand.
Right. So there's players out there that someone's signing that thinks that they're of that level.
What was that model? Was it Brentford, Lawrence? Was it Brentford that did that a few years back?
Brentford have done it a few years back with good success. And sometimes you've just got to look at your return on investment. And is it there for us? We spoke about there's a gap between the youth set up and the first team, getting the first team ready. We don't really see a way to bridge that with the current model. Well, do we keep it investing in the youth while that gap's still there? We don't have a way to bridge it, or do we just say, well, look, because that gap's there, it's not really a sustainable model. Why don't we then copy the Brentford model and get first team ready players that are ready to step in?
It's an interesting one to throw into the mix, because it goes against everything that I believe in terms of Celtic, Lawrence, but understand the argument. We've been speaking about the Rangers game. Before we go, Natasha, give me a prediction for this weekend. Are we going to break the domination, this invincible league season that Rangers are on currently?
Yes, why not? I'm going to go with yes. It's about time the team delivered us something this season. And if it does have to say, it's got to new lows if this is all that we're taking as a high from the season. But yeah, they've got to give us something. They've got to step up and achieve something, and play to keep their jersey if they want to be here next season. Although most of them may not. Yeah, I'm going to say yes.
So Natasha thinks we're going to win. Lawrence, what about yourself? Is it going to be a 3-0 win and a job offer in the showers this weekend?
So I think we're going to turn up in buses that aren't parked at Hamilton. We won't clap them onto the park. We're going to win 1-0 by a penalty. The Rangers will get a penalty given against them and a man sent off. So they will also lose 3 records. They will have a penalty against a man sent off. And we will win 1-0.
Lawrence wants it all this weekend, and why not? Thanks everybody for tuning in. Loads of great comments coming in on the social media channels. If you haven't done so already, support Alternative Media by subscribing to our YouTube channel. And all that's left for me to say is thank you once again to Natasha Meikle and Lawrence Connolly for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.